Thanks so much to everyone at SOSA. This is a really great initiative that you guys have started. Lots of great sharing happening out of SOSA right now with the Thermal podcast and the Hangar Flying seminars. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come in and talk about proving grounds. And really our approach here is glider pilot to soaring pilot in 3 simple steps. So we'll talk a little bit about how the platform came to be, some guidance that we provide clubs that are thinking about creating an instance for their gliding club. And we'll just kind of go through some of the presentation. So just gonna get my notes here. So I think when we talk about soaring to the converted, we appreciate that there's very little else that people can do that compare to soaring. It's spectacular and accessible, and it's one of the, really one of the most engaging and exhilarating things maybe human beings can do. And increasingly, our perspective is that gliding is increasingly accessible, actually. So there's great gliders at clubs. You haven't really had an inadequate glider produced in about 35 plus years. I'm sure we could debate that, but there are underutilized machines pretty much at every club that we're familiar with across Canada. Weather forecasting has never been more accessible or accurate. If we think about the evolution from skew tees to Dr. Jack to SkySight today, the ability to forecast and predict weather phenomena that we can exploit. We have a very low barrier on flight computers and moving maps. So if you're working at the club to implement XC-SOAR devices on old Android phones, when we compare that to the moving maps and in-panel displays, not to take away from those incredible pieces of equipment, but again, the barrier to entry quite low. And actually our story has never been easier to share. Of course, we have the OLC, but posting traces on skylines provides a link to an actual map that my mom can make sense of, whereas the topography heat map in OLC is a little bit confusing. And then we think about the content that we're able to share on services like Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn with incredible imagery. It really is, we think, a really great time to be involved in soaring to attract new people to the sport. So getting started in the tools that are required have never been more accessible, but new pilots we know can be fickle, and gliding clubs are not inherently inviting. So many of them lose their path after solo. I will commend SOSA has an enviable cross-country culture and development culture where most clubs do not have this benefit. So if we start to think from the new member, the novice member experience, and we think about the milestones to those new to the sport, the thrill of the first solo, their first half hour of sustained flight, their first full hour, 1,000 feet of climb in a single thermal. These enabling points are kind of something that we don't think about anymore, but are really transformative to the novice pilot. But we kind of ask the question, what happens to those members once they lose that path of growth? Some of them have this trouble finding the path to the passion that we're all familiar with, that is for many of us a compelling addiction. And then I think what we're trying to do with the Proving Grounds is close this gulf between the recently solo novice pilot and then the cross-country champions of the club. I think even just hearing the chatter before this meeting started about flying from SOSA to Tillsonburg to east of York and then coming back, many of us that have flown cross-country in Southern Ontario, myself included, can kind of paint a mental picture of that, but we would appreciate that a novice pilot might be quite confused with what that means as far as a cross-country flight go. So I think what we're trying to do with soaring with Proving Grounds here is to really consider that pilot that's stuck between recently solo and flying York Soaring, Lucan, Flesherton, New Hamburg, York Soaring, and see if we can create a safe path for growth to make it clear and provide the confidence to the club that these individuals are capable of taking club machines for long distances. So I'll just kind of contextualize Proving Grounds in my case and how this platform really would have helped me. So I'm in my 21st year of gliding, or 21st year since I received my glider pilot's license. 2 years ago, I guess 3 years ago, I did some back-to-back 500s after I moved out to Alberta. But my path in gliding, I think, was a lot slower than it needed to be, had tools been available to me to help accelerate my development. So I'm a CRGS pilot, and then after the cadet program, I was flying at York with kind of a figure it out yourself development culture there. In 2016, I took a club glider to the Mayfly. I also managed and participated in the Nationals at York in 2016. I moved to Alberta in 2017, raced in the provincials, did some pretty good flying in 2017, and then actually won my first provincial contest this year, hosted at my club, which I fly currently at QNIM. So if I look back, it took me a really long time to learn the language of soaring. It was 4 years of participating at a soaring club before I had any decent flight to post on the OLC. And in retrospect, it's kind of frustrating for me about how much time I spent, not to use the term wasted, because it was supportive, but underutilized or below potential. What's even worse when I think about my experience is to think about all of the students and all the members, the enthusiastic ones that came to the sport and left before discovering the challenge yet relative ease of flying cross country. And I would like to highlight some lessons from the 2016 Mayfly, or the Mayfly contest generally, as being transformative and really informing what we're doing here with Proving Grounds. So for those that don't know, the Mayfly is a contest that the Gatineau Gliding Club hosts every year on the Victoria Day long weekend. It's an incredibly supportive contest. It's a task flying environment, whereas most competitions, use of the radio is frowned upon. It's proactively encouraged, this contest. And what was really interesting in flying at the Mayfly with members or pilots from Rideau Valley Soaring Society, Montreal Soaring Club, and Gatineau Gliding Club is that all people in the region, whether they were in the contest or not, were familiar with the fixed task 1, task 2, and task 3 in the region. And it was evident to me that it really supported a shared understanding of the terrain that the pilots could fly over. That when you said task 1, everybody knew what that was. It wasn't a list of turn points. Same would go for task 2 and task 3, obviously. And that the tasks supported a stepwise development for pilots, building confidence in their abilities. And I would expect that this remains the foundation, or is the foundation, of cross-country soaring at GGC, if not the other clubs in the region. So for me, this was a real winning approach to creating a cross-country development framework that was static, but it still required member development and member time. Roger Hildesheim evaluates the tasks through the contest weekend against CU to provide all the scoring. And what we're really looking for in Proving Grounds is something that's very low maintenance. Another informing component here is for those that are familiar with the BBC show, the original Top Gear program. They use these magnetic boards with metal boards with magnetic strips to record top times for high-profile vehicles or for stars in a reasonably priced car. But this is it's a DIY ranking system. It provides public recognition. It's tactile. It works as a trophy. It's a little bit unscientific, let's say. So this was a big part, or something that also informed what we wanted to develop with the Proving Grounds. So in 2018, we had implemented the kind of first generation of the Proving Grounds at QNIM Gliding Club, where we had defined tasks and magnetic boards with the magnetic strips, or so the metal boards with magnetic strips, for pilots to self-assess their task time. And then if competition really got fierce, we could break open CU and evaluate the tasks. It was effectively a near total failure. The how to score, scoring support, all of these questions required the level of member engagement that we were really hoping to avoid and try to create an autonomous system. Through the winter of 2019, we had one of our members, Casey Brown, is a new member to gliding, but super capable technically. He sought to break out IGC file altitude and location turn points, or points to validate against the defined tasks. And in early 2019, the Alberta Soaring Council provided a bit of capital to us to create an email bot to really make this a scalable solution, and they supported the installation at the 4 clubs in, sorry, that should say Alberta. So at that point, early 2019, we had a system that would evaluate your IGC file against defined tasks, and you would email that in and email it back. And then that's when we had really something that we thought was ready to scale. That brings us to today. So coming into this soaring season, as the kind of fits and starts that we're experiencing influenced by the COVID-19 pandemic, we have 13 clubs across Canada that have configured a proving grounds. Most clubs received their kits in the late 2019 season. Even though many clubs received this equipment late in the season, we had over 400 flight traces processed by the bot. So those would be successes, failures, and tests. And we have implemented 2 French-speaking clubs, so it's now a French and English platform, and really built to scale. So that's kind of where we're at today, but looking to increase our exposure around the world to interested gliding clubs. So any help that you might be able to provide in creating some of those conversations would be appreciated. We've got some pretty interesting feedback. I think if you do a control F for proving grounds in the 2019 annual reports from SAC, there's a lot of enthusiasm expressed from many clubs that have received this equipment. We did hear feedback from Toronto Soaring Club and Rideau Valley Soaring Society that inclusion of average speeds would be beneficial. So through 2019 and 2020, we did implement average speed calculations based on distance flown. So that's kind of where we're at with respect to, and recognizing that we don't want to be changing the rules as on the go. That the static rules will help the longevity of the system and of the platform. The scores will stand over time. So I think we're pretty comfortable with the rule set that we have implemented right now. One of the big takeaways for me is I flew a flight with one of our students, and he's getting close to solo, but there'd been a gap in his training, and he'd kind of lost the why of the training, and we went and did a racetrack, which is very accessible. It's a local task, and when he filled out the task sheet and put it on the board, you could see him welling up with tears of pride as though he's getting recognition, where a lot of the cross-country people walk around boasting about 400 or 500 kilometer flights. This student pilot was now part of the group of mentors, and that for me was really strong validation that the novice pilot, these starting pilots, that this is going to be a platform that would really serve them into the future. Talking a little bit about the platform that we offer and kind of the tasks that are available. So this is the QNIM proving ground. So we have a diamond pattern around the gliding club. Each point is no more than 15 kilometers away. With a racetrack task, and SOSA has this as well, but the obvious start finish line is going to be the club. Any turn point can be a start and must be reached to complete a lap, and you can do successive laps to get the fastest scored time or highest speed, however you want to rank it. What's nice with this is that this remains a safe task for any pilots about 1,500 feet above circuit height with kind of a 20-to-1 glide ratio. So it's something that can support kind of the bronze level pilot, the time builder. You don't have to have a cross-country endorsement in order to get some exposure to task flying and the thrill of completing a task. Triangles follow the racetrack, so they can be flown clockwise or counterclockwise. It just depends on the club configuration. We recommend 100 and 150 kilometers. SOSAs are a bit larger. It's a more advanced cross-country environment, which is great. But we encourage clubs to define them over safe terrain with good land out options, and that they build on each other so that if you're unsuccessful in doing the large task, you still have an option for success on the medium task. There are some other rule variations that we accept. So we are doing 2-kilometer cylinders on turn points, but we could do FAI rules. That just makes it even harder for the novice pilot, although some of the tenured cross-country folks that we talk to seem to prefer that, but we always are trying to reset the expectation that this is for novice pilot development. And we'd like to see some out and return tasks implemented. So here in Alberta, we have the Livingston Range, which is like this 30-kilometer knife edge north-south range outside of Cowley. I'd like to see some top times on that as a single run. You know, SOSA might consider someday like a Lake Erie convergence time trial. So this can scale depending on your creativity, but this is what we're offering primarily, or what we're encouraging clubs to adopt as far as a framework for safe cross-country flying development. The kits are really an important part. There is a trophy aspect. This is the SOSA kit. This is our model for the website. So these are all stainless steel, laser cut and etched task boards. We ship 50 magnetic slips, so 15 for each task board plus 5 extras. They're labeled with white vinyl so they won't get UV bleached. And we're really hoping that this becomes a fixture for years to come as something that does not require a ton of member time to maintain, and you know, certainly will stand the test of time. We ship laminated task sheets for inclusion in a club glider, and loose task sheets for members to mark up or for whatever purpose they're interested in. They can always be printed at any time the PDF is available. And in 2020, we sent a branded clip to hold the task sheets. Something that we found at CUNYM was that these were getting lost frequently, so we wanted to support clubs in making this really a one-stop shop in order to serve the members that are interested in engaging with the platform. So this is really the technology of the solution is the bot. So when you're done flying a flight, you obviously have an IGC trace. We ask you to email that to your club's bot. So for SOSA, it's sosa@soaringtasks.com. The trace is automatically evaluated against the tasks, and the result is returned to the requesting email address. Task times and average speed are going to be provided, and if your glider type matches one that's listed in the SSA handicap list, you'll get handicap speeds. We're also going to be building more functionality at email requests into the system. So right now, if you sent an email with the word task to sosa@soaringtasks.com, you would, get the cup file back with the turn points that are used with the SOSA proving grounds. So this is what we have set up at CUNYM. Really, the emphasis remains just to go flying and try the tasks. Encourage attempts relative to pilot abilities, skills, what have you. It is designed to be part of a supportive cross-country culture. It's an opportunity for mentors to fly with students, get them familiar with the terrain, familiar with the turn points, familiar with flying effectively AAT rules. I would encourage more tenured cross-country pilots to consider your large tasks when you're flying on a larger day. If you hit the first turn point of the triangle on your way out to a much further location, and then hit the second turn point on the triangle on your way back, you might set like a 4 or 5 or 6 hour time on that task, which provides a window for the novice pilot to beat their mentors, and it also validates the system as a platform for growth within the club. But obviously you just really want to have fun with it, and that's what we'd certainly encourage. As we come into the 2020 season, this is our effectively 3rd season with the Proving Grounds at CUNYM, so we're starting to think about how we can build on the change in culture that it has facilitated. So we're actively encouraging flying and to record every success through the season. What we had to do at the end of the 2019 soaring season is we wiped the task, the magnetic slips, so that a pilot only had 1 slip on the board at the start of this season. And we're going to retain only the top 5 times overall year on year, so that there's lots of room every year for new times to come in, but for those best times that they'll stand as a marker to work toward. We are encouraging or suggesting that clubs consider awarding a prize. I know Toronto Soaring Club is offering a free aero tow for a top time. If you want to find a local sponsor to sponsor the task, that's an interesting way to do it as well. Or organize a fun task around, a fun event around the tasks. And we'd love to know what you're going to do. We can share that in a newsletter that we're going to put out. One thing we've talked about at QNIM is that everyone throws $10 in a pot, and the fastest task through the weekend takes the pot. Or we have this idea of the Growler 500. We don't know how to make it 500 kilometers or what have you, or the Growler Grand Prix where you win a growler of beer if you win the contest. But the idea here is really just want to use this automatic solution, a common rule set to have some fun and encourage people to come out to the gliding club and to take a flight and attempt a task. So just a little bit about, so this is the team of the people behind this program and platform. So many of you at SOSA would know Chris Goff. He's our tasks and rules expert. Kate is also a member of SAC's sporting committee. Casey Brown is an engineer. Everyone, I guess, has kind of KW roots here. So he went to University of Waterloo, and he's the brains behind our technology. He's a third-year glider pilot, but very enthusiastic about the sport and contributing. As I said, I grew up soaring, at least at York Soaring. I grew up in Waterloo. And our approach really is that the future of this sport requires more people discovering how awesome soaring is, and that converting novice pilots into soaring pilots is important for all of us. And so we are hoping that the solutions that we can put together can help novice pilots find that path to a lifelong love of soaring, and for clubs to thrive with the growth of those members. And with that, if there's any questions, or certainly thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today, I'd certainly open up the floor to any questions.
Hi, Patrick. Steven Sikora here. Is there a concern that in some clubs the mentality might develop that the experienced pilots just start racing around these things and the novice pilots feel like they can't, even get on the board effectively?
Like, I think that might be a risk in a very, very large club, but if you are one of those pilots that's racing around the task, like, you have the opportunity to maybe only leave your individual best time up on the task. So unless you've got the top 15 in this case, cross-country pilots cruising through that smallest task, would that become a risk? And then if you reset that task board at the end of the year, you have 10 open spots at the bottom to go through the next soaring season. I don't know if how attractive the smallest task will be to the highest profile kind of competition pilots. It is certainly a risk, and I would be interested to understand how clubs would manage that specifically if it became an issue in their particular club. But I think there are a number of ways to mitigate that risk, and hopefully just completing a task. Like, the idea, I know when I talk to my friends and I say, I'm flying from point to point, they are amazed because they think that it's just a miracle you can stay up at all, let alone fly with any sense of direction and then speed. And if we think about like the general public that might have that opinion, that's also effectively true for novice pilots in many cases. So going around a course powered only by ingenuity and Mother Nature, hopefully is somewhat of a reward. But I would definitely agree with you that there would be a risk that if the ranking sheet was just full of the club's competition pilots, that would not necessarily be explicitly supportive to novice pilot development.
Can I throw in a couple of cents worth on that as a soaring pilot from SOSA?
Sure.
I doubt that any of your self-respecting cross-country pilots are going to be loading the board up. They're going to be going out elsewhere and doing some big tasks to put up some big points on the OLC. Going out and loading the board up. If we're out there doing the racetrack or something like that, chances are we have a student tagging along behind us. I don't think that's going to be a problem. Any self-respecting cross-country pilot's going to go do some real cross-country and not stoop to hoarding the board, so to speak. Although there may be a few that have too big an ego to walk away from that opportunity.
Yeah, I took off at like 4 o'clock on Wednesday. I've just do my first flights in a new glider, and I kind of strolled around the racetrack at CUNYM. It's a local task. It's, one of the comments there from John Mulder at Central Alberta Gliding Club is that, it gives you something to do on a day where you might otherwise not take off, and getting takeoffs at Gliding Club is important. So, yeah, I would agree that I would not expect, competition pilot to prioritize the racetrack over a large day, but I would also encourage the mentors in the club to consider some of the tasks, the larger tasks, the middle task, as a way to validate the platform for the novice pilots. If it's seen as a tool for the lower tier pilots, that I think becomes counterproductive potentially in the culture development. But that's of course going to be a club decision and a pilot decision. Chris Goff has not flown a single task in the proving grounds, even though he's like made it. But anyhow, yeah. So I think, I would encourage you all to fly tasks and get names on the board. But yeah, I don't expect that you're going to waste a day that would, like, the day that's supportive for the top times is a day that you want to be going longer distances. And yeah, I like the idea of bringing a student along and shepherding them through. That's a really great way to be supportive in that cross-country development, for sure.
Don't know how well you guys can hear me, but one possible fix to that could be to have like a fourth board for honorable mentions. So say like a club, like the top guys, if they want to race around and put a good time up, they could go on like a separate board where they can still compare themselves to everybody else, but then you just save the regular board for the newer pilots.
Like, I think if you limit the task, if SOSA is a kind of large member base, active cross-country club, maybe just the rule is Patrick can only have his name on each task once, and then you're likely to leave room on the board for those novice pilots to put times up. But yeah, I think I'd be really interested to understand, to see updates of how they're used at a large club like SOSA, with such a rich cross-country culture, to see if this is a problem that we have to kind of more proactively consider for other clubs around the world.
If you flew a 500 that year, your name comes off.
Yeah, I don't personally like that, but if that's the rule that SOSA wants to do, then it's at your discretion. How you guys implement this thing is up to you.
Yes,
No, it's
Paul
up to
here.
Paul.
I mean, my suggestion would be, it's your creation. We should start with your model, but personally, I think that we might decide to use different, when the board fills up, and here I'll just share my thinking with you. What was our best cross-country year was 2016, and we actually had 51 pilots record flights on the OLC. And so, of course, I'd like to see 15 on each of those tasks. But if there are more, I would almost say it should be the most recent 15. That way you're still trying to do a task in October and not worry about, am I going to beat my May or June time? But
Sure.
The first thing is to get them up there, right? So
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
we can change rules later if required, but I think this is a great tool you've created. Other questions for Patrick here?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment or a suggestion. Can you hear me?
Sure, go ahead.
Yep.
Yeah. Hi. So I'm a relatively new pilot. I just did all my solos at the end of the season, so I didn't get to do any of the proving grounds. But I'm very enthusiastic, and so this winter I started doing a lot of training on Condor, and so I took our proving ground task. I'm from Rideau Valley Soaring, so Uli. So I took our proving ground tasks and created Condor tasks with them, so I could practice them on Condor. So it's you kind of alluded to something earlier, Patrick, you know, the steps it takes to get to cross country, there are a lot. It, you know, I'm glad you were kind of acknowledging, you know, without guidance and without determination and without a whole bunch of factors, it takes years. And I thought, well, okay, someday, you know, maybe I'll get to fly, you know, in 5 years from now, a 100-kilometer task. But I tell you, with the proving grounds, plus more importantly, the experience that I've had in Condor, I go, well, yeah, it's like, you know, I've jumped over a lot of little hurdles that you would have to go through. It would take you a season or two to go through. So, anyways, I just encourage that that's another very useful thing for people to do, to create Condor tasks of their proving ground tasks, and they can bring people along. You know, and our club is going to have a Condor simulator for our club, so you know you could easily take a pilot to introduce them in cross country and say, well, you know, let's fly it to, obviously you could take them out in dual and go do the, you know, the short task, and then say practice it on your own in Condor, you know, and then as a way as stepping stones. So anyways, just some ideas, just sharing some stuff.
No, I think that's really great feedback, and your club has been incredibly proactive in providing support and insight, and it's great to see how RVSS has embraced it. So I think that feedback is super valuable as the feedback from the novice pilot considering this. I know Casey, as an example, who's not a cross-country pilot on our team, he had a little bit of a light bulb moment when he said, you know, if you do the racetrack 3 times, you've covered the distance of the largest task in the proving grounds. So like it's these enabling steps and trying to create a framework that doesn't require a mentorship weekend that invariably has poor weather, that hopefully we've created a tool here available to clubs that they can leverage to save you those years of punching through the sky and trying to figure it out.
Well, what you just said also refers to another thing. You said the light bulb moment. And I think there's a lot of psychological hurdles that one has to go through. And so last year I was fortunate that I took some fairly long flights with some club members. And one day I was up with a member, and we were up there for almost 3 hours. And I was like, oh, okay, so I know that I could, you know, in the future, be comfortable flying for an hour or 2 or even 3 in a glider. And
Right. That's great.
That's great to hear. And Patrick, a couple other comments were coming in the chat. You might have noticed from Greg saying that the traveling trophy is a good analog. The good pilots don't bother with it. And then Eric saying, well, of course, you could also divide into categories by the experience level of different pilots. You know, aboard for the 300 hour or the 500 hour or the 1,000 hours. So there are lots of possibilities.
Sure. Yeah.
If the questions are slowing down, we might shift from the general proving grounds to the SOSA track, which I'm happy to talk about. So we'll just take a couple minutes to shift over from Patrick's to my system.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Patrick.